while the screen looks a little different to how it might have done 10, 20 years ago with PhoneBox, actually you're still looking at, this is a ringing telephone call from Anne, so we can see who it is before we pick up the call. We have held telephone calls here, which we can just speak to and provide ordinary kind of call screening stuff, put in smiley faces, say how good they are as a caller, or more importantly perhaps put alerts and warnings in so that next time they ring in we know something about the history of that caller. And so PhoneBox's job historically has been to pull that together for talk shows, so you can sequence callers perhaps into a particular sequence. And it was probably about 5-6 years ago that we were discovering that more and more people were having not just traditional telephone calls, but also messaging. So we added SMS, email, Facebook, Twitter, etc. So we can take now tweets or SMS messages and sequence those together alongside the traditional kind of telephone content. That way the role of the producer becomes much more being across all of the audience interaction, seeing what people are talking about. And because social media is about more than just your audience talking, we can also pull in content from other sources. So if you're a music station, we can pull in what we call a music smart cue, which is to look across the artists of the music that you're playing, automatically pull in social media from them. Or today we're sat in Melbourne.
So in this case you've got Block Party and then you just pulled in all the references to Block Party.
So just because you played that song or that song's playing next, all that information is available on the internet. And here we are in Melbourne, so we can go and search for Melbourne as a geographic location and then pull content towards us from the location of a news story or a sports event or a festival, etc. So very much PhoneBox is about not just giving you more ability to communicate with your audience, it's also about giving you bigger ears to hear what your audience is saying. I think a lot of people in radio rushed to using social media to give themselves a bigger mouth. And we can show you some clever ways we can do that in a minute with video clips and visualization and so on. But we really want to also focus on allowing radio to have bigger ears to actually understand what the artists are saying about the music that you're playing, what newsmakers are saying, what your audience voices is, so you can join in their conversation. And interact in the spaces on the topics that they're talking about.
And of course the traditional way of a broadcaster using PhoneBox and now using these new innovations of PhoneBox is to bring it into the studio and talk about it. What about the other side? Is PhoneBox useful to then push out content from the studio, from the broadcaster, and engage on these platforms?
So one of the things that then happened once we were handling incoming social media and interacting with the audience is stations were increasingly want to push content out. So one of the first things we added was just the ability to schedule future posts quickly. And then for stations we were adding the ability to edit images, so using a touch screen to just very quickly select a particular part of the screen or zoom in, put a watermark on to brand it for the station, get it set up to the correct size, etc. And really as we were doing that we realised that what we really wanted actually was a camera that was pointing the right direction in the studio, was originating photographs and video, so we had that content directly available. And when we thought about that, we thought, well, that really is a visualisation system. It's a system that can switch cameras, can be shooting video. So we were able to add in what we call Virtual Director, which is using very simple and small, relatively inexpensive cameras, don't require expensive lighting, but they will follow the content automatically. So essentially, the workflow in the studio hasn't changed. You walk into what looks like a standard radio studio, it's not distracting with lights and cameras. Every time you open the fader and the mic, it automatically starts recording, starts switching between the cameras. And then having done that, as soon as you close the fader, you can go straight into the little video editor that's built into the PhoneBox screen, zoom into just a little bit of the content that you want. It'll automatically put a watermark on if you've got some sponsorship. It'll put a pre-roll and a post-roll if that's what you want. So without changing the skills of the radio production or without changing the workflow of what happens in the studio, every piece of good radio content you've got is now much more shareable. So we describe this as being not bad automatic television, but as being shareable radio. There is no natural habitat or habit of sharing audio-only content, which is why we, as people with our audio document of everything we've done, everything's locked up inside that audio. We need to get it out from that, so that when did you last search Google and see an audio response come back, or where's the habitat in social media for sharing audio clips? But we see video clips all the time. So by putting those images and those video clips together, we've seen stations have literally millions of views of traditional radio content, and we've seen the timeline and their feeds go from being just generic sharing of generic memes and posts to being almost entirely driven by the content that's come from the
Give me a couple of examples of stations that are using that and getting good response.
Yeah, so two of the first in the UK. One was when Chris Moyles, who was the former Radio 1 breakfast presenter, he was part of the relaunch of Radio X, and we had 5 million views in the first 10 days of him going into a new studio. And I think Global, as a customer, was incredibly surprised. We'd built him. He's a wonderful radio talent, and he's also really keen on the engineering and the technology. So they had built him a fantastic new studio. But I think even in doing that, they hadn't really realised how well that content would work. We just started putting the clips up, and it got incredible traction for a new DAB and FM in London and Manchester station. Tremendously kind of positive reaction. So they rolled it out across their other brands. So for people like Capital FM, a youth format station. But the one that's really surprising, I guess, is LBC, which is a classic news talkback radio. It's essentially a middle-aged man in a room talking to himself. But those video clips get incredible traction. Not the imagery can't be what's doing it, because it's a middle-aged man talking to himself with a wide shot when the caller is on. So what gets incredible traction is the emotion, whether it's something that's deeply moving or makes you politically agitated or angry. Trump has certainly helped. We've had some good calls in the last few weeks. I will get tens, if not hundreds of thousands of views of clips of just the best few minutes of those radio programs. And I think that really helps radio, that we're not just creating social content for the sake of it. We're able to use social media so that our fans and listeners can share the content that they already love. But previously, I talk to radio stations all the time about social, and radio has this powerful emotive element that you would have driven here this morning or come here this morning, maybe you listened to the radio, something would have made you laugh, something would have made you cry, something would have made you angry. And previously, before social, then what? Nothing. You couldn't tell anybody about it. You couldn't share that moment. So if we make those little clips available, then you see that, and then you will introduce your friends and family to those moments, and they will discover what it is that you love about radio. And it's a new way, I think, of radio taking the best of what it does and helping it to find an audience. And by using the radio content, it reminds the world that actually they should eventually be drawn back to actually listen to become listeners as well.
It's one of the things that I think from this year onwards, the technology and the awareness of exactly that has dawned on radio stations, and radio stations are now looking for many different ways of just pushing out their content on all these social media platforms. So the game is changing, and this is one way of delivering it. Yes. What about here in Australia?
Well, Australia has been very interesting for us because it's relatively similar to the UK. You've had quite tight regulations, so you've got really serious groups of radio stations who invest heavily and have very loyal listeners. I think you have more talent. You have much more talkback radio than we have in the UK. Outside of the BBC, we don't have so many people doing talkback format. It's much more popular here, and actually being here at the community, meetings. Your community radio is much stronger. In the UK, that really was crippled by the regulations to protect commercial broadcasters. But I think we haven't had the long history. I've met people here who've had a community station for 40 years. It's only been going maybe a little bit less than 10 years in the UK. So you have a much longer history and a much stronger set of competition. I think the community sector here seems to be quite passionate. You've got little vertical markets in some of the major cities who are really very successful, and we think that if they are able to use these tools, they can get that content, because community radio, doesn't have to be a geographic community. You get pop-up communities online around all sorts of things. It can be a short event, it can be a political, event that's happening, or a festival or something. And so, I think we try and get even the big broadcasters to stop using social media as what we call a flagpole, which is just, hello, I'm a brand and I'm over here, and try and use it as a totem pole, which is to say, to use it as a way of building a like-minded community that understands and shares your story. And what better stations to do that than community stations? And you will have people, even if you're a geographic community station, even if you're a remote community station, you will have expat community people all over the world who actually want to be connected to and understanding and engaged with your content. And now, however big your FM transmitter is, you can do that on a global basis.